Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Javanetics. So, in the last lesson, we worked with installing Java and installing Eclipse. In today's lesson, we'll be looking at variables and data types. So, variables and data types are kind of the building blocks when it comes to working with Java code. So, a variable. So, what is a variable, right? So, a variable is a placeholder for a value. So, what does that mean? I have designed a very simple problem for us to understand because we do this very often in math. So, here we see John has 10 apples and he gave them equally to two friends. How many apples did each friend receive? Well, the answer to this question, before we even solve it, the question we often ask, well, what are we solving for? And in this case, we are going to solve for how many apples, right? And we are going to say that that is x. So again, John has 10 apples and he gave them equally to two friends. How many apples did each friend receive? And this is going to be x. So how do we solve for x? Well, x is going to be equal to 10 apples over two friends. So each of these friends have received 5 apples, right? So x is going to be equal to 5. This is exactly saying what this statement is. We have a variable, right? A variable x, right? It could be x, it could be y, or it could be z, and we are putting a value inside that variable. The and it is a placeholder, so it can be x, y, z, ABC. It doesn't really matter. That's why it's a placeholder. The most important thing is we are storing values within it. Now, what happens if I tell you instead of 10 apples, we are going to have 11 apples now, right? This is very simple. We would do the same thing. We'd say 11 divided by 2 is going to give us 5.5. It is going to give us 5.5, right? Now, we can say that x is therefore going to be equal to 5.5, right? We can just put that in that sense over here. So when it comes to working with Java, in we need to tell Java, okay, you're going to be working with 5, which is a whole number, or you're going to be working with 5.5, which is a decimal, right? We need to tell Java the specific type of data it will be working with. So to do this, we use something called data types. So data types, they indicate the size and the type of the variable, right? So they indicate the size, and we'll be looking at the size, but right now what we can understand that it indicates the type of the variable. Are we working with whole numbers? Are we working with decimals? And various other types of data types that we are going to look at. So what are the types of data types that we have in Java? So there's when it comes to working with data types, there's two main types of data types that we need to be concerned about. There's the primitive data types. These are predefined data types or data types that are pre-built within Java, or reference data types and non-primitive data types, right? These are usually user-defined or not pre-built. So how do we know difference between a primitive data type or a non-primitive data type? Is that primitive data types usually they start with lowercase letters, and for non-primitive data types we start with uppercase letters. That is usually the case. Now, there's 8 type of primitive data types available in Java. These are byte, short, int, long, float, double, char, and boolean. So byte, short, int, long, these work with whole numbers. All of these work with whole numbers. Float and double, they work with decimals. Char works with characters. Boolean works with true or false. And then we have one more that is a reference data type that is called string. So whenever we're working with string, we have to use something called quotation marks or double quotes. So think about strings like spoken word. So if you're coming to someone and saying, this is my name, I live in XYZ street, I'm working at XYZ company, we can put that into quotation marks. I'll also notice that I put a semicolon next to the word here, and we'll be looking at semicolon, but that is kind of a period. Every single expression that we write in Java, we use a semicolon with it. But more on that later. The main thing is that these are the most common ones that we'll be working with. There's only 8 primitive data types available in Java. but we can have many reference data types and many non-primitive data types. The next thing we want to look at, well, we said data types indicate the size and the type of the variable. So we understood the type, but what about the size? So if you go to this link, it will show you the specific size. So byte, short, int, long, we go from the smallest to the largest. So int is going to be the one that we work with most of the times. Long is when if you're, let's say, working at a financial institution, and if you want to work with really large numbers, maybe you will be using long, but not often. Okay, so now we can see that, for example, for short, it goes for negative 32,768 to 32,767. So one of the things you can notice is that, first of all, that whole numbers and both decimals, they work with negative values as well, right? There's we don't only need to work with positive values, we can work with negative values as well. In Java, that's completely fine. Another thing you can notice is that the ending is negative 32,768 versus the positive range is 767. That is because in Java we start counting from zero. So one of the things you can realize, so if we go from 0, 1, 2, right? If we count from 0, 1, 2, we have counted to 2, but we have actually counted 3 numbers, right? The same thing here. We are counted from 0 to 32,767, but in reality, we have counted to 32,768. We will be looking at how Java counts more in depth in later, but one of the things, it may have been a question that you have had, is that why is there one that is missing from the positive range? And that is because we start counting from 0. Now, when working with decimals, we have two that will mainly work with: float and double. And so float will be storing up to 6 to 7 decimal digits. Double will be storing up to 15 decimal digits. Boolean only works with two types of values, true or false. And char only works with, well, character, single letter character, or ASCII values. So let's look at what are characters, right? The standard characters that we use often are kind of the ones that mostly you have some other alternatives here, but mostly the ones that you find on your keyboard, right? So for example, space, exclamation mark, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, each of these has a very specific ASCII or hexadecimal value. One of the things to note is that, for example, if we have a capital letter and a small lowercase letter, these have different values. These have different hexadecimal values. These have different ASCII values as well. So these are completely different, right? So one of the things that we need to understand, that every single specific character has a specific value in Java, a specific ASCII value and a specific hexadecimal or hex value. That's the only thing that we need to understand for now. Now, how do we really work with these data types in Java, or these variables and data types in Java? So the way we can work with these in Java is that each of these has a very specific syntax that we need to follow. Syntax, you can think of it being similar to grammar in the English language or in any language. There's a grammar that we need to follow when we are working with Java code. And so the syntax is that we'll have to have the variable name and we give it the value. So same thing that we have done in math. We say, well, and we just did before, well, x is equal to 2, right? So it's the same exact thing. But the only thing is that we have to tell it what type of data we are going to be working with. So in this case, we're working with a whole number. So we can say, okay, it's an int x that is going to be equal to 2. One of the other differences that we'll highlight in a bit is that you can also remember in the problem where I just said, okay, well, the unknown is x. We can do the same exact thing without giving any value. We can just say int x. And again, this is where we put the semicolon. Remember, the semicolon acts as a period or a full stop, and a semicolon means that the expression has ended. So every single expression ends with a semicolon. So in this case, I'm saying int x. So that is, I'm not giving it any value. This is declaring declaring the variable, and this is defining the variable. So this is where I'm defining the value that it actually has. So this is how we work with variables when it comes to working with them in Java. Now let's look at actual examples. So we are going to create a new project. So the way we create a new project, we will say new, right click new, and we will have we'll select Java project. You can also go to file, new Java project from here as well. So now we will name the Java project. We will name it, let's say, variables and data types, right? Variables, data types. Notice that the way I'm writing is very specific. One, it starts with capital letters, right? That is the convention. If I start with smaller letters, that is not the convention when working with Java projects. And each keywords, in this case variables and data types, the first letter will be capitalized. This is called camel case. This is called camel case because it looks like kind of the humps of a camel, right? So V is one hump, and then D is one hump. So it looks like the humps of a camel. It goes up and down, right? So these are this is kind of the standard when we're working with Java programming. You can also see here you have the Java version available. You have a lot of other informations where you're going to store this. For now, you can just leave everything as default. You can just click finish. It will tell you, do you want to create a module? And the module is what we use when we want to send information. This is not what we want to work with right now, so just don't create. So this is your project. You should only have one, and you'll see two things. The JRE system library, we can expand it if we click on this. If you click on this arrow, we can expand it, and then you see all of these jar files. You see all of these jar files. These are files, again, jar files that come with the Java. Your Java 11, it's going to have these jar files come with them. We can have our own jar files as well, or jar files from the internet, and we can use them as well. For now, what we're going to be working with is this folder. This folder is called the SRC folder. So the SRC folder will contain a couple of things. It will contain packages and classes. So kind of looking at the hierarchy when it comes to working with Eclipse is that Eclipse has a hierarchy, and we'll talk more about this hierarchy. But it has a project, and each project has several packages, and each of these packages have classes, right? That is usually how it works. Each project can have more than one package. Each package can have more than one class. Then that is kind of the way we are going to work. We are going to do right click new, and we are going to go to package. And the convention when it comes to working with packages is everything is in lowercase. I know the convention may seem something that you have to get used to, but in general, it is something that with practice you'll be able to pick it up. So now with the Java package, we can name it something such as first program, all in lowercase. And we click finish, and then we do right click new class, and this you'll get this class window. We can name the class window hello world, right? Hello world. Usually whenever we are working with Java programming, the first program we usually write is called hello world. So this is hello world over here. Now you can also choose this, and this is the public static void main. We'll talk about the main method, but the main method is basically the method that allows you to run Java programs. So you can select this. If you didn't select this, I'll also show you how you can do it just without selecting it from here. But for now, let's select it from here and click finish, and you should have your class. So same thing, within a project, we have a source folder within which we have a package, and within the package we have a class. So coming over here, if you don't have the main method, you can also just write this entire thing out, and it will operate the same way. We can write public static void main string array sign args, and then building blocks. And we'll talk about the method more specifically in details. This is just in case if you didn't click on that. If you didn't click that checkbox, it's perfectly fine for you to write the main method by hand as well. But that is not the focus of today's class. Today's class, we are going to be working with variables. So the same way we have worked with variables, we can take a data type and we can say int a is equal to 10, right? This will be perfectly fine. It will not complain. We don't necessarily need to do byte or short because you will rarely ever use them. You'll mostly use int, and you might use long, right? So long L is going to be equal to, let's say, 20, right? So now how do we really see this? How do we see, well, what is the value? How do we work with this variable? We have all of these variables, and within these variables we can store values. So how can we really see them? Well, we can do something called system.out.println. So what this essentially does is it prints to the console. It prints whatever we are going to pass within these brackets. It's going to print that to the console. So I can pass A, right? So if I pass A, notice that if I hadn't created A over here, if I hadn't created A, and let me get rid of this, then it would give me an error that A cannot be resolved to a variable. A cannot be resolved to a variable. So what we can do is that, because the way it works is Java will basically say, oh, is there an A variable out there? They will say, well, there isn't, and it will throw an error. So instead of that, we can also just pass the value itself. We can just pass 10. That's perfectly acceptable as well. So let us go back to having that variable, and I will show you that even if I print it two ways, I'm going to get the same exact result. I'm going to say A, and it's going to go back to here. It's going to get that A, and it's going to print 10, and here it will just print 10. So if I run this, it's going to tell me that I need to save it, and you press OK, and you'll see this. And I'm going to talk about saving in a bit and running applications. But this is how we are going to be able to see in the screen. We are getting 10 here, even we just give the value, or here if we give the variable. Now I'm going to get rid of this. And one of the things that when we need to realize when working with long is that right now it's a very small value, so it's perfectly fine. But if I have a really huge value, then Java will give me an error because it will think that this is still an int. So long is special, and also some other types of primitive data types are special, that we need to put an L next to it, right? The L can be capital or lowercase is perfectly fine. So we can just put capital L or small letter L, whatever is more convenient, and that will tell Java what we are working with a long type variable. So that is the only way when we are working with long type variables is we have to type L next to it. So print line, and this time I'm going to print L, and instead of which was 20 before, it should print me a large number. Now going back to saving, you have two options over here. You have save, or you have save all. If you do save all, it saves everything, and then you can just click run, and that's going to run the whole thing, and you'll get this huge number, right? Now we also have other types of data types. We have float f, which is going to be, which only takes up to 6 decimal places, so 32.67. I'm not going to go all the way, but it will only take up to 6 to 7 decimal points. And with double, we are going to get up to 15 decimal points. So I can do a 9 point, however many it will take up to. And so in this case, when we are working with float, again, this red squiggly line means that we have an error. Yellow squiggly line means that we have a warning. And we'll look at yellow squiggly lines in a bit. But the red squiggly line here, it exists because for float, just like long, we need to type F next to it, right? So only when we type F next to it, then will Java stop complaining, because this is how we work with floats. The standard is actually work with doubles, but I just wanted to show floats and longs just in case, right? So also, these yellow squiggly lines are like warning signs, and they're basically trying to tell you there's a warning that, hey, you made these variables, but you're not really using them anywhere. So the value of the local variable f is not used. So we can quickly fix that. What we can do is we can do system.out.println, and we are going to say within this pass f, right? Same exact thing, system.out.println, and we're going to pass D. Okay, so we're going to pass D. Okay, so now if I save all, you can either do save or save all. Save all is safer because it saves all your files, and then you can come over here and you can run again. Then we see both of our values being printed. There are some other variables that we work with this, which is char. One of the things to notice about char C, is that it only works with single quotes. So it works with single quotes. That's how Java knows that this is a character type variable, is we work with single quotes. So we're going to come over here, system.out.println, and we're going to say char C, right? Or pass down C. And if I now save all, we can also run another way. We can do right click, run as Java application, same exact thing, and it would give you the character A. Okay, finally we have Boolean, which is going to be true or false. Boolean is going to be true or false, and we can just say false. Can just give it a value, and I forgot to name the variable name, and I can say boolean b is equal to false. And then we have to go over here, system.out.println, and pass b, and that should print false. So if I save all of this and if I run this, then I should get false. Okay, when it comes to the basics of variables and data types, this is it. Just to get us started, I would say create some different characters, create some different booleans, create some different ints. You can also experiment with byte and short. It works the same exact way. And create another program, create another project, create another package, create another class, and within that try to create these variables and try to print them. Just get very comfortable with typing these things out. We're working with Eclipse, so we can have shortcuts, but I'm not implementing any of those shortcuts right now. Maybe we'll look at those shortcuts towards the end. But that is it when it comes to working with, basic levels of Eclipse. We learned about camel case, that we have conventions, that we start the capital, we capitalize every single keyword. We learned working with several projects, packages, classes, data types, primitive data types, reference data types. One of the things that I want to quickly cover before we wrap up today is that, remember I said that, hey, we can define a value or we can declare a value. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is that when we declare a value, right, what is the value that Java is putting in, right? I just said int x. Well, the way it works is that Java has a set of default values for every single variable. So here we can see that for every single variable, for string we get a null value by default. If I just create a string variable, let's say string s, and I leave it like that, this is perfectly legal in Java, just like we can do in math, but it will get the value of null. Same thing when it comes with int, long, byte short, float, double. Only difference again with long is 0L, with float and double is 0.0f, 0.0d, and for boolean the default value is false. For char the default value is u for zeros. You don't really need to memorize this, but it's nice to know. This is the Oracle documentation which talks about the default values for each of these variables. But other than that, that's kind of the basics of data types and variables, and we'll try to kind of see the interactions between each of them and see how they really work in the next lesson when we talk about operators and conditional statements. So that will be all for today. Before we go, again, just wanted to say, please go check out the Patreon. This really helps us keep the channel free. So thank you for your support. Please go and check out the Patreon. I will be seeing you in the next video.